Next up, we have Terrace Marshall Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU, who is a pretty interesting prospect, right? I've seen him in a lot of different places on draft boards, whether it's wide receiver 3 or 4 and should be in the first round discussion, or sometimes even significantly later than that into the latter half of day 2, by example. So that's why I was interested in hitting the film, seeing just what he had to offer, and ultimately seeing where I would fall sort of in that range. The first thing you're going to see then as we get into the statistics is that, Marshall did do a good job of progressing year after year. In large part, I think that was more so due to the continually additional opportunities, I guess, that he was offered, right? Obviously comes in as a freshman. There were a lot of guys ahead of him on the depth chart, and then you sort of see him come into that wide receiver 3 role behind Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. And then, in 2020, he was really that primary offensive weapon, and I think he made the most of his opportunities, no question, right? You're looking at a guy who had a knack for the end zone, 23 touchdowns in those last 19 games. That's certainly impressive. And then you take that production and then consider the additional pro day numbers that we've got recently. And I think Marshall becomes a significantly more interesting prospect for a lot of people, right? We're talking about a guy who is 6'2.5", first and foremost, which, might not be much to write home about in a normal draft, but this year he's been the tallest guy by a pretty wide margin, right? It seems like 6'2" is Calvin Johnson height, considering we've had 5'10", 5'11", 6-foot guys all to this point, right? So 6'2.5", a nice refreshing change of pace in that regard. 205, so solid there as well. And we're looking at 19 reps on bench, which is certainly impressive. A 39-inch vertical, a 10.5 broad jump, and really the most interesting thing in my opinion is the 4.39 40-yard dash. I say that's interesting then because as we'll kind of get into my grade. What you're going to see is he has the lowest speed and quickness grade of anybody that I've given. And you might be saying, well, 4.39, how do you not have him as a 14.15, right? And in all honesty, I did not see that speed or anything close to it on film. I think that if you just look at that sort of RAS score or those raw pro day numbers and think that that's the sort of athlete that was on film these last 2 seasons at LSU, I think you're going to be deceived and, deceived past the point of deception, right? Because he's just not that guy. He really isn't to me. He looked significantly less quick than anybody that we've watched this point. I know I talked about that a little bit in the Bateman video where, there was a clear gap between him and the rest of those top 3 guys, Chase, Smith, and Waddle. Well, I think there's another pretty decent gap between Bateman and Marshall. I'll say, one area where you maybe saw that speed was just on straight vertical routes, right? I think there he really got to sort of stride out and really make the most of his larger frame. And in that, you would see him occasionally separate. But in that sort of 0 to 10, 0 to 15 yard range, he did not look very quick at all. Right? There was almost a part of me that wanted to go back and make sure that I wasn't watching the video in 0.75 speed, by example, because just highly questionable, right? And for me, it could potentially be almost an intensity and sort of focus question, right? Like, did he come into this sort of 2020 pandemic shortened year with sort of a lackadaisical approach, right? Did he view it as, 2020, a free year, really doesn't matter as much. All of our best guys just graduated, right? Jamar's already opted out. And instead of trying to seize the opportunity, did he just view it as a chance to kind of coast a little bit and just, ease his way into the NFL draft, right? I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm not claiming that is or isn't the route that he took, but it's certainly something I'd bring up in interviews if I had access to those, honestly, because if that's as fast as he can get into a slant or an out or an in or a post or those sort of things, there's some concerns in my eyes, right? And that to me is sort of the value that we've missed out on a little bit in having no combine, right? A lot of times that gives you a chance to compare your speed that you saw on film to what he's actually running, right? And there is a difference between what somebody can do in a helmet and shoulder pads versus a t-shirt and shorts, by example. And I think Terrace, at least from my perspective, certainly appears to be a guy where there's a significant distinction and, in my eyes, some raised questions, right? Otherwise, in terms of route running, I'll be honest, I gave him the same grade as Jamar Chase because they both sort of had the same really basic approach in my eyes, right? They're very vanilla in their route. If you say, hey, Terrace, run a post, he's going to run a post, right? There's going to be no sort of deception. There's going to be no chess game. There's not going to be significant nuance in his footwork. He's not going to be trying to deceive that cornerback. He's not going to be trying to attack him in a way that, he flips his hips and goes that way when I cut back the other way. There's not really that, right? It's more so just, hey, you said run a comeback. boom, boom, come back. Hey, give me the ball. I'm open, right? And that's good because he is getting open with those sort of raw abilities from time to time. But I think if he added and continued to work to refine and add that nuance, like we've seen out of, say, Devonta Smith or Rashad Bateman, I think that he would just be a significantly better receiver, right? And can he improve in that area? Most certainly, but there's also a chance that he won't improve. So I can't account for something that I haven't seen yet. If that makes sense, I'll give him a 15.5. And kind of as I had previously said about the focus and intensity concerns this past season, I think that also manifested in the hands and just general consistency. He had far and away, in my eyes, the worst hands of the bunch to this point. Just a significant increase in the number of concentration drops in my mind. Just, it's one thing if it's an uncatchable pass and you go up and make an attempt, but there were a lot of plays across the middle, drags, slants, ins, those sort of plays where it just felt like he had wide open, nothing but space in front of him, no defensive backs even really beating down on him, and the ball just goes flying through his hands. And it's just those sort of things that make me question what you're even doing out there, right? And then add on top of that, I forgot to mention this actually on the last slide, but he did end up just choosing to opt out after 7 games. So then it kind of does play into that discussion of, did he even want to be out on the field? Did he even care? Did he just want to, flash really quick and show, yeah, I can play without Jamar and Justin, and then get out of there, right? It's certainly a point of contention. I know I gave him a 5.5. There's always a chance that he's just loafing, right? There's a chance that he's not playing his hardest. And, in that case, maybe the grade should be higher, but I can only go off of what you show me, right? And, when you show me what Terrace did, I wasn't radically impressed in that regard. I was pretty impressed with, though, his ability to go up, climb the ladder, and haul in contested catches, those sort of 50-50 balls. I felt like, this was really a spot where his size showed out, right? Being 6'2.5", especially compared to some of the guys we've done so far. I think that you saw that height disparity, right? Especially on deep balls in particular. I felt like he just did a great job of going up, climbing the ladder, and really ripping those away from corners to get some big plays going for that LSU offense. A big reason for that success, in my mind, also came down to the tracking and body control. I would say just his ability to, while mid-air, sort of adjust his body to the ball, kind of similarly to how we saw Jamar Chase would, right? I said that was one of his best traits back in that video. If you haven't seen it yet, obviously click the link above my head. But I think that, that's evident in Terrace's game as well. Just mid-air adjustments, able to, get his head around, locate it, and then snag it out of the sky. I felt like he did a great job there. And, that really did, at least in my eyes, contribute to that massive touchdown production, right? We were talking about that knack for the end zone that he had in his time there at LSU. I think his tracking and ability to haul in those 50-50 balls was a large part as to why. In terms of his rack ability, I gave him a 6.5. I just think that there was a lot to be desired there, especially coming off the backs of some of the guys we've seen to this point. I just didn't sort of see that 4.39 speed manifest, nor did I see much quickness. And, he was another guy like Bateman who didn't test the 3-cone and shuttle. And I think, again, I sort of see why, as at least in my eyes, that was one of his bigger weaknesses. A lot of times you just see him go up, make a catch, and then almost instantly get tackled. Not all the time, obviously, depending on the separation that he did have, but 6.5, I think, is pretty fair in my eyes for what he showed on film. In terms of his release, then, I felt he was pretty solid in large part due to his size, right? A lot of cornerbacks were just simply unwilling to meet him at the line of scrimmage because of, that massive frame, as well as, as I said, that ability to long speed beat you over the top. And I think that you saw that, right? In terms of those shorter patterns, like I said, things were pretty sloppy. Things had no real sense of urgency. That's why I docked him a little bit. But otherwise, I think that he was one of the more solid guys that we've seen so far. And sort of contrasting with that, in terms of his blocking and physicality, he was devoid of it, right? And that's just, again, so disappointing when you have a guy with such a big frame who should, by all means, be debatably the best blocker to this point. Yet I'm watching Devonta Smith give significantly more effort. I'm watching Jalen Waddle nearly give the same effort, right? And that's just sort of disappointing to me. And obviously it was a thing with Chase. It's now a thing with Marshall. To me, it's just sort of a question of that LSU receiving room, right? Like, do they even want their guys, sort of sticking their nose in and trying to block guys? Because it certainly didn't look like it from now the 2 guys that I've watched here recently. And it's disappointing because I think that could be, based off his sort of athletic profile, those 19 reps on bench, I think he could be pretty good in that regard. You just don't see it, right? So I can't credit you for something that I'm not seeing. And lastly, in terms of size and athleticism, I gave him a 4.25 just because, might have been a little bit generous in all honesty, but I think at 6'2.5", nearly 6'3", I think that's pretty solid, as well as the athleticism. That's more so the pro day number, the raw t-shirt and shorts type grade. And I think that at his height in particular, a 39-inch vertical, 10-foot plus broad jump, all those bench press reps, 19 again, and that 40, regardless of whether or not it's accurate. I think that he's a supreme athlete in that regard. Even though I just wish that we saw it a little bit more on the field, if that makes sense. So I gave him a 4.75. Overall comes out to a 73, which, as you're going to see, put it on the big board. And I'm probably a little bit lower on him than most people are, in all honesty, right? Towards the back half, the very back end of the second round or at least my round 2 grades, I should say. And I'm not even going to get caught up in, who he's around, right? Oh, would you actually take Sam Cosmi before Terrace Marshall, by example, right? Because at the end of the day, he's just not going to be there, right? If I was a team picking at that spot, sort of in the low 50s, high 60s, he just won't be available at that point, right? A lot of other people are higher on him than I am. So, once we get to that point, he'll just be a guy that's already crossed off my board when we get there. I think that he's a solid player. I think that he's a pretty raw guy who, he might have the athleticism, but I just wish we saw it more. I just think that, outside of those pro day numbers, there's a lot of questions in terms of, just that real focus and intensity that he was playing with on a week-to-week basis, to the point that he ended up opting out midway through his season. I mean, still was solid in what he showed. I did want to mention earlier as well, he had nearly 100 yards per game, although he only actually had 3 games over 90 yards. So a couple higher end games were sort of skewing those averages. I wanted to bring that up just in case people were saying, how could I not be as high on his production as with other guys? I felt like there were a couple really good games, and then a lot of other games where he was a no-show by any means, but I have questions as to whether he could be your top receiver. And personally, I'm really not sure if he can be, in all honesty. Maybe he could develop into one. I hope for his sake he gets put into a good situation where, kind of like that 2019 LSU offense. You have some other weapons. You have a great QB, a solid running back. You have, an elite defense, by example. You're just a good team, and he can kind of thrive there just off of those sort of more vanilla route combinations and such, to where, no, he doesn't need to be getting himself open. He'll just be open by the nature of the offense, and then he can sort of develop that later on, if that makes any sense at all. But at the end of the day, regardless, even though I am a little bit lower on him, I think there is still a lot of potential there. And I think if you're a team who can get him midway into day 2, late day 2, potentially even, I would feel great about that, right? If you get him into the 3rd round, now we're all good in my eyes. I think that at that point, he's certainly worth the risk, but anything above that for me, I would sort of question. I know just recently, actually, there have been some concerns about his medicals due to a foot injury, as well as previous leg injuries back in high school, from what I've read. That's not taken into account on my board. So, if that's a red flag that the medical doctors and whatnot are worried about, obviously you would have to drop him accordingly. But for me, based off film and what I saw in the couple, 6 games that I've watched, I would sort of put him in this range. So with that being said, if you guys agree, if you disagree, make sure you not only leave a like, but also let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear, are you one of these people who have Terrace Marshall as, say, your wide receiver 4, by example? I believe that's where Mel Kiper has him, at least from what I read, which to me is a little bit interesting. I think then you're more so skewing your grade towards just raw potential, and maybe, instead of where I have speed and quickness as well as athleticism versus 20 total points, maybe you have it where 40, right? 45 potentially. I think that, if you're somebody who views your grade in that regard, then you might have Marshall a little bit higher than I do. But when I'm looking for just a little bit more polish and stuff that consistently gets you open at the next level, I think that he's a little bit lacking there. So otherwise, once you've liked the video, you've left a comment, make sure you guys subscribe, right? We're getting pretty close to the draft here. I know I have quite a few receivers left that I'd like to get to. So with that being said, if you'd like to see those videos, make sure you click that sub button and are constantly in the loop with all of my future uploads. But if you have missed out on any previous ones, make sure you click the playlist that should have just popped up on the screen there's 65 plus at this point, so hopefully you guys can go back and see some other players that maybe your favorite team is potentially going to draft, or after the draft has drafted, and yeah, I'd just love to hear your feedback on them as well, right? So with that being said, I am mic'd up, now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys.